conductive wire, and you were so electric. I had no say when you came so near, and just passed right through me.
Hey everyone, welcome to Geekdom is Back. I'm your host, Deanna Chapman, and today I am joined by Drew Dietsch, and we are talking about the 12-issue series Wonder Twins from DC Comics. It is written by Mark Russell with art mostly by Stephen Byrne. I think we get a different artist for maybe one or two issues here or there. But Drew, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. I am feeling the total refreshment, as Zan would say. You had mentioned wanting to do this for Welcome to Geekdom because I just kind of mentioned it in our conversations offhand. You were like, "Hey, would you like to talk about this?" And I'm like, "Absolutely," because this is one of my top comics from the past couple years that I've read. And you know, to say I'm not super on top of kind of prestige and well-reviewed and well-received comics as I used to be. But this was one that had me interested for a couple reasons. One, Mark Russell had done a run of Flintstones, which was also a limited series that was extremely critically raved about. And I was like, okay, I'll check that out. And I quite liked the Flintstones. There's some elements of it that have jumped into meme territory out of context. They're like, yeah, this is pretty ridiculous. But when it was announced that he was going to do the Wonder Twins, I was like, that seems so perfect for his particular approach to comedy, and how to use comedy to still be, you know, full of drama, full of things to talk about, you know, extremely great themes. And the Wonder Twins has great themes going on. It's a really meaty book, and I like that Mark Russell is able to be really thematically meaty while still being absolutely absurdly silly. I think that's one of his best talents, and I think it might be best put to use in Wonder Twins.
Yeah, and I was not familiar with any of these characters going into this, other than obviously the main Justice League characters who appear in this, but sure. I didn't know anything about the Wonder Twins or their planet, their father, their grandfather.
Gotcha. Okay, well, I can't speak to how much of that he made up for this because very cursory backstory, and this is pretty much my and most people's only exposure to the Wonder Twins, was that they weren't comics characters. They were created for the Super Friends show.
Right.
The cartoon. And over the years, they pretty much became the butt of jokes. Like they eventually integrated into the comics at some point before this, but they were pretty much joke characters in the modern viewpoint of it. It's like, oh, they, you know, their power is they have to, you know, say Wonder Twin powers activate and press their magic rings together, which was in the cartoon. And this, it's just, you know, their powers. And then one of them can turn into animals, and the other one can just turn into different forms of water.
Right.
Which is like, yeah, that was always it's like an easily lampoonable idea for superheroes. And pretty much that's what they were. And I think that's probably one of the reasons they appealed to Mark Russell, because it's like, oh, I can take these characters who at this point are pretty much just joke characters to most people. And that allows me to utilize my sense of comedy and satire within that to also make a good dramatic argument for them as characters. And I think he succeeds in that. I think like Wonder Twins, this will forever be my version of Wonder Twins.
Fun little fact here. This was actually only meant to be 6 issues, and then it was so well received that they extended it another 6 issues, which DC technically calls a maxi series. I still call everything a limited series. It's just easier for me because I think Marvel will call them one thing and then DC calls them another. Yeah, and I'm just like, yeah, it's short.
I used to have a book by Dennis O'Neil that was about writing for comics.
Right.
And he talked about different terminology of miniseries, maxi series, yada, yada, yada. And now it's kind of like, yeah, it just depends on branding. Like for me, anything that's like designed to go for a certain, you know, limited run, it's limited series or you know, mini series or whatever. And that is interesting because this is very clearly divided into 2 halves in terms of the story structure. I actually made a point of that when in issue 7, it was like, oh yeah, the way they have to recap everything and the way they're jumping back into it was done really well. It's like, oh, clearly they had a break for however many months. and came back and had to kind of, recap what happened. And I thought they did that very well while it not being tacky or slowing down the pacing.
Right.
This is also Mark Russell's backdoor into getting to play with not really the Justice League. It's primarily the Trinity, and really it's Superman.
Yeah.
Like, this is a stealth Superman comic from Mark Russell, I believe.
For sure. And because, like you said, we really only see the Trinity and Green Lantern here and there.
Yeah, there's, like Hawkman shows up.
Yeah.
There's, flashes there. But as far as focusing on them as, like, giving them strong character beats, it's honestly, it's not even really the Trinity. It's primarily Superman and Batman, and really primarily Superman. Superman has a lot of focus in the story, not just because he is presented as the face, the talking head for the Justice League, but he's the one who, saves Jan and Zana from exile. I'm sorry, Zan and Jana, mixed up their first consonants. He saves them from the exile of the planet. He gets them set up on Earth and set up in the Justice League. First is essentially just sitting around as interns, and then eventually tour guides, which is hilarious. And so there's a lot of Superman here, and Superman ends up representing quite a bit, and is even criticized throughout the book. But he certainly has some very powerful moments in terms of getting across Mark Russell's belief of the character and philosophy and what he should represent. But he's not stealing the show. This isn't like, Zan and Jana are our main characters. I think having the two of them be essentially an opportunity to explore two very different perspectives with whatever problem, and the perspectives being optimistic and kind of pessimistic at times for Jana. Because Zan, I love Zan so much. He is one of my favorite characters in superhero comics over the last decade, because he is so funny, because he's so naive, but his naivete is a way to showcase his positive outlook about life and how he's trying to make the world a better place.
You see the two of them kind of struggling with the differences from their planet and everything that's going on Earth, because they were in this sort of utopia. And while it wasn't always that way, it's pretty much all they know, because everything from when it wasn't that way pretty much happened like before they were born. And you get that backstory filled in. And I think that helps with the pacing of this, because you don't want to just have an issue where they throw all the backstory at you and then you jump back into the story. I like that it's kind of sprinkled throughout, so you're getting little bits and pieces. And obviously they're getting accustomed to Earth while sort of being thrown into the situations at the hall, where they're mostly giving tours, but they also have like these side missions that they will go on every once in a while, as Batman is back up to Superman and then they're back up to Batman,
Yeah, that's after because that's in the halfway point, because in the first 6 issues the Wonder Twins are given the honor of stopping a big worldwide villain scheme by the Scrambler, which the Scrambler is this great villain who has the ability to body switch, and he is planning to body switch everybody on the planet as a way to get across like the inequality. Like, it's like the only way we're going to have equality on the planet is if nobody knows how powerful they're going to be tomorrow. And I love Russell's use of the comic to explore these kinds of ideas of justice. He doesn't believe in good and evil as it pertains to social structures in this. He talks about, well, I should say, Jana says that, there is no good and evil. There is just pettiness and generosity. And those are the two choices you have to make. And it's a whole book about how do you make justice in the world? What is justice? Because they're constantly seeing that this constructed world of superheroes and supervillains, it's a binary system that isn't actually evoking change. It's just maintaining a status quo. And that's that's a bold thing to use this comic to talk about, which is hey, yeah, the Justice League, they're doing the best that they think they can, but they're not actually changing anything. And it's interesting to see that be a talking point in this comic. I really enjoy that. And again, I enjoy it a lot because Mark Russell is able to be very funny and very silly.
Yeah.
It's an extremely silly comic without being stupid or, pandering. The humor comes from the characters, the satire of the world, like the integration of Lex Luthor in this comic is so good.
Yeah.
I love this version of Lex where he is the ultimate villain capitalist, where he has a Fox News equivalent where all the human broadcasters are all also bald. Which is great that he would make them all look like him. That's so brilliant.
It's amazing. But at the same time, that because Lex is in this story, something very serious is going to happen. And we see how Polly's dad plays into that because of the work he did for Luthor and the work he did in high school when he was just sort of trying to create something to make the world better. And then it turns out that's not really what it was going to do. And you see the panic that is spreading because planes are going down. You have people protesting and, really enjoying what is happening. And that's no surprise. I mean,
yeah, no, I mean, there's some, I like that Russell is able to use comedy to really talk about some bad elements of our modern culture.
Yeah.
Like the great thing is that the Scrambler, when he has this plot and, says to everybody, like, I'm going to scramble everybody's consciousness on the world. And as a demo, I've just scrambled 1 million people. And like, to like one of the examples he shows is there's like some sports, like, supplier, like they make like soccer balls, and it's some boss saying like, I don't care, we need this order and yada yada, and all of a sudden he's switched to some sweatshop kid that's making the soccer balls, and so everybody's freaking out, and so because of this, the nations of the world actually get together and solve like every problem.
Yeah.
They put into legislation like, we figured out climate change, we figured out economic inequality, we figured out everything because we don't know who we're going to be. And then when the Wonder Twins and with the Justice League are able to stop the scramble, everybody rejoices and they throw all that legislation out the window. And Jaina is Zan is celebrating. She's like, yeah, I love the episode. I love issue 7, because when he comes back and he's super popular at school, like, wow, did you really took down the Scrambler? And he's like, well, look, I got to give Superman and Green Lantern an assist. But yeah, it was like, I love Zan. I love him so much. I love the
dating issue was fun.
The date issue. Again, he is this incredibly, positive character.
Yeah.
He has his down moments, but he is showing and he, helps show Jaina like how he believes he can make the world a better place. Cause it's like, he goes on this date and his date's ex-boyfriend shows up to the movies and they end up reconnecting.
Yeah.
And Zan is totally just like, not cared about or whatever.
He's like, I got a friend out of it. It's fine.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Like the Red Flag, which is a great supervillain character. Is like, oh, dude, you got friend zoned. You were trying to get some chick, and now you're a friend. And he's like, that's awesome. Like, we probably would have broken up in like 4 weeks because we're 17, but now I have a friend, and that could last forever.
Imagine if we could all be like Zan.
Zan is so great. I mean, to the point where there's this really somber moment. I think it's in issue 3 because I think that's when he gets Gleek.
Yeah.
And Superman is talking about, well, Jaina, is confronting. He's like, look, there's like all these problems in the world. And Superman says like the real superpower and being on this planet isn't flight or speed or invulnerability. It's knowing everything that's wrong and not going crazy from it. And it's like, wow, and the panel is great because it's, Superman looking very solemn with a bunch of TV monitors behind him of a bunch of the world's problems. And it's like, oh man, like that's really rough. But right after that, Zan is there and he's got Gleek and Superman's like, is that a monkey? and and Zan is feeding him a banana, and he's like, yeah, like he loves this. Like the only thing you can do is, one happiness at a time. Like you can try and just be kind to somebody who needs your kindness, and that's the way you can make the world a better place.
Yeah.
One act of kindness at a time. And that is like, that ends up being the kind of lesson at the end that Jaina learns, is like, yeah, this is the, a wise man told me that you can save the world by one kindness at a time. So Zan is just like this. He's, he wants to be super popular, but he's not, he's great. He's just a great, great character. And Jaina is too, because Jaina has a much more, complicated and analytical look at what's going on. And she has a real, I like that the stakes aren't just for her, like, oh, the woes of the world. It becomes personal when she becomes friends with Polymath, who's, dad we talked about, who worked with Luther. And because of what happens with her dad and the Scrambler and everything, Polly resents Jaina and looks at her as like, all right, well, you're on the force that's against me, that's opposing the change that I'm trying to bring to the world. And there's in issue 7, there is when they're doing the recap of what all happened.
Yeah.
Zan is like, oh, this is great. Like we saved the world, and now I'm super popular. I have the nickname I like. Everybody in school likes me. And Jane is like, yeah, it wasn't a great week for me. My friend feels that I betrayed her, and now she looks at me as an enemy. And her plan could have fixed so many of the problems of the world, and we stopped that. And Jaina blames herself, and Zan, I took this because I really liked this moment. He said, I know she was a good friend, but you can't hold yourself responsible. If you respect Polly, then respect her decisions. Right or wrong, she did what she thought was best, knowing the consequences. That's all any of us can do. And I'm like, what a great like summation and standpoint for it. It's like, look, because the book is again talking about, in this comic book superhero world, and as an analog to our own, we've constructed this binary system of there are good guys and bad guys. There are heroes and villains. And that's not what's going on. That's not what's really happening. It's people trying their best and knowing the consequences of their actions, and trying to do something that they believe is good, whether it's our approximation of good or not. It's a wonderfully complicated little book, but through those elements of humor and just really great story pacing, it never feels preachy or bogged down. Like the silliness is always there. It's trying to be a fun comic and make you laugh. I just love all that. I just love that it's able to take these characters and turn them into, real dramatic characters while still being just consistently funny and silly.
Yeah, and they're high school kids. It should be that way.
Oh, yeah. I love that, one of my favorite things that's in issue 1 is that they talk about on their planet when Zan does like, I am Zan from the planet Exor at, his student introduction to the class. He's like, yeah, everything's great until there's a thunderstorm, because then we get this thing called the Thunderlust, and we're all changing, and the teacher is like, okay, Zan, thanks. And he's like, many bodily fluids are exchanged, and a thunderstorm happens when he's like trying out for track.
Yep.
And doing P or whatever. And he's like, I've got the Thunderlust. And so now, he's like, oh, I hate this place. I hate Earth. Like, we can't be here because I got the nickname Thunderlust. And it's like, it's one of the few times in the comic that he is truly dejected.
Yeah.
And so they go back to the Hall of Justice, and Superman, Batman, and Wonder Woman are there, and he talks about it. It's like, oh yeah, like Wonder Woman's like, Zan became a man today, which is so fun. It's so great to give her that line. Like,
yeah.
And then Superman and Batman are both like, that's all, dude. Let's sit down. Like they share high school embarrassment stories, like. And I love that Batman goes first. He's like, I wrote a love song to this girl I had a crush on, and the teacher thought it was my poetry assignment, so she read it to the class, And it's like, to be sung in the tune of whatever by the Bee Gees. And he's like, so my nickname that whole month or whatever was BG.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh, like Batman. And then he's like, if I survive that, you'll be fine. Like, and Superman does the same thing. It's great. Like, it is. It's like, hey, remember, like, these superheroes, for as much as we take them seriously, like there should be a joviality and a lightness and a relatableness to them on a lighter level. And I like that Russell is able to do that with the Justice League, in particular Superman, but like Superman, Batman, they stop some hostage situation or whatever. Once they're stopped, they're like, hey, you want to go see a movie tonight? Like, it's like, all right, I'll see you at 7:30. It's like, oh yeah, like they're friends. Like it's nice to see the Justice League be friends.
Yeah.
Like it's because so much of the drama of a lot of those books is what's the ideological clashes that they have and stuff. And it's like, oh no, they go see movies on Friday nights together. It's like, oh, that's nice. I like this.
Yeah. And I think just a quick note on DC in general, they've been doing a great job with putting out comics like this that are 6 to 12 issues or something. And even some of the other stuff like DC Black Label, they'll do like 3 books of something, which they're usually like double or triple issue sized. But reading this kind of reminded me of how I felt when I was reading Superman's Pal, Jimmy Olsen by Matt Fraction and Steve Lieber.
Yeah.
Because it just has that lightheartedness that you don't always get, especially from DC, because DC comics do tend to run a little on the darker side than like some stuff you'll get from Marvel, for instance. But Marvel, I think, needs to do more stuff like this. And I know Marvel versus DC is like an age-old thing, and I just find myself wanting to read stuff like this more than jumping into an ongoing series and trying to figure out if I need to start from the very beginning and run all the way through, which I still do. I'm doing that for Nightwing right now, and it has some pretty low lows for the Rebirth run. So I'm kind of just like biding my time until I get to the Tom Taylor run.
Oh, I didn't even read. That's past my time as far as my involvement with Nightwing. I mean, talking about Marvel DC for a moment. I grew up. I loved both, houses and characters from them, but DC was always the one I felt that was more accessible to me because there were so many options of like, hey, you just read this one story. Like it wasn't, a matter of, I didn't even look at it as like runs or whatever. It was like, oh, here is this Batman story. And, it was 8 issues in Legends of the Dark Knight or something, but whatever, it's just a story and it's totally self-contained. And I think part of that is because DC has been willing, both in canon and in kind of their overall approach to reinvent themselves and reboot themselves way more than Marvel has, because I think Marvel's taken a much stronger view of continuity, or their, seeming continuity. And then that makes it's like, well, yeah, you have to acknowledge that this thing happened in canon and yada, yada, yada. Even if it really doesn't matter to the particular story you're telling, because there are definitely Marvel runs that's like, okay, yeah, I can read this, devoid of anything else, but there's still the sense that it's taking place in this bigger world where there have been other things going on and things are like, you are defined history. Whereas DC, like with this Wonder Twins, I love this because it's not beholden to anything but itself. It's like, it doesn't have to worry about what's going, what characters can we use? Cause who's in continuity right now? And like, oh, if I do this with Superman, is it going to look bad because they have that other Superman comic going on? It's like, no, DC's always been like, there's like 7 Supermans going on, like right now, and they're all different. So pick the one you like, which I'm more of a fan of. Like, and something like the Wonder Twins is a great example because their characters, like, you can't do a DC Black Label Wonder Twins. Right. Like, Black Label is also known for, it's like, they called it that because it's like, this is all the super serious stuff, guys. R-rated. And it's like, okay. And there's certainly good stuff that is, great stuff that has come out of DC Black Label. But Wonder Twins as a limited series is like, yeah, these aren't characters that need to be showing up in the next Crisis event or, you know, in some team up book or whatever. It's like, no, this version and the version of the DC universe they inhabit is perfect for this story. You know, I wouldn't want to see the super serious, you know, Wonder Twins involved in some serious, you know, like some DC event where, you know, they all come back as zombies or something. It's like, no, I don't care. It's like, just do this.
Yeah, we don't need that. And I think, you know, it's just interesting to me what DC has been doing on that front with, like we mentioned, Black Label, but even Hill House Comics.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
that's something that is very much up my alley and yours. And
for sure. I mean, I'm glad any major comic outlet has a dedicated horror, you know, like outlet, you know, or just whatever they want to call it, because I know horror can be a dirty word for some people, but you know, I'm absolutely stoked for that, you know, because I mean, for me, when I was growing up, and I wasn't as aware of it until I was a little bit older, like in my teens, was DC's Vertigo imprint, which was like, oh, this is like, you can come and do some weird stuff over here.
Yeah, Sandman, Preacher, Why the Last Man. A lot of that stuff is great.
Alan Moore's Swamp Thing, like all that, like, yeah, I have a ton of Vertigo stuff. And it's like, yeah, it's just this thing over here. Even if sometimes DC characters will show up and stuff, doesn't really matter. Don't worry about it. This is its own thing.
Yeah, exactly. And even with this was under a pop-up imprint, which was called Wonder Comics. So it started with Young Justice, Naomi, Dial H for Hero, and Wonder Twins as part of what they called season 1. And I think it got cut a little short because then season 2 was just 6 issues of Amethyst and a single Ginny Hex special. But, you know, Young Justice, Dial H for Hero, and Naomi, I can definitely see them all being along the lines of this, so that makes sense. And
well, it definitely sounds like it was an imprint designed for like younger teenage, like preteen, young teenagers.
Exactly. And you know, some got more issues than others, which Young Justice getting 20 issues doesn't really surprise me, but again, that's still a pretty contained run in the grand scheme of things at DC and Marvel, because they love their ongoings. And it seems like DC has kind of gotten over the whole, we need a number 1 every few years or something, because the Rebirth stuff is on issues in the 90s to 100s for certain titles.
Okay.
So they haven't rebooted just yet from, I think, 2016. So they've been going for like 6 years on the same ongoings. But then they're adding in this stuff, which I think I really like.
Yeah, I'm way more for this. Again, where I just don't, you know, after, honestly, Crisis on Infinite Earths, that was like, you know, the first time I was like, this is the big in-canon, you know, reboot thing. This is why we're doing this. And then it just became a cycle of like, okay, every decade or so, we need to do something like this so we can reboot the continuity so that, you know, the diehard fans can, you know, be like, oh, well, you know, the versions that we rebooted, they're still canon because they exist in some multiverse or whatever. But, you know, we also need to have number 1 so people, you know, because people feel weird picking up, you know, Batman 578 because they're going to feel like they're totally out of the loop. You know, it makes much more sense, which is why I think, you know, the limited runs make a lot of sense capitalistic wise, because it's like, oh, yeah, like nobody's going to feel that they need to read anything outside of this or before this or anything. But also, I'm just more about, hey, give a really talented writer and artist a character, let them go do 6, 8, 10, 12 issues of something. Yeah. Don't let it factor in, you know, eventually when you do, you know, Crisis 17, like it'll be like, oh, we're going to do that version of Batman because people really liked that limited series, you know, or what happened in that continuity. And it's like, fine, whatever. But I can't care about ongoing event comic stuff.
It's so hard.
I gave that up a long time ago because it's like, because I was in the thick of it when they were doing 52, where it was, you know, like every week, you know, this event was going on and leading up to I think that was leading up to Final Crisis. I don't know. There's been so many crises. And I was just like, I can't, you know, even if you have somebody, a good writer on these things, they they just don't matter as like self-contained stories. They're about these bigger universes that, as much as I love DC and that universe and characters, I just can't care about. I'm like, no, I'd rather just read a like really good Harley Quinn story that only lasts for 8 issues.
Yeah.
And it's like, you know, that's it. That's all I need. And it's like, great, then I'll read the next one when they come around.
I think that's why I was drawn a little more to Scott Snyder's Batman run for New 52, because it seemed very focused on Batman, with exception of, you know, a handful of issues here or there that tied into other events. But for the most part, you can read that run start to finish and not feel like you need to go read 3 other titles. But
no, because like, I mean, Batman being the flagship character, they're always like, it's so funny. I've said this before. I'm like, I don't know why DC in films is so interested in making, you know, a big DC universe idea when Batman is big enough to be his own universe. Like,
right, because you have the Batman title and then you have the Detective Comics title, and that's kind of where I fell off with Rebirth. I have like the first 3 Batman trades and the first Detective Comics trade, and it felt like those 2 at that time when Rebirth relaunched were kind of intertwining a little too much, and I kept having to read like issues of both, and so I didn't really keep collecting it. Plus then they launched DC Universe Infinite, so I kind of started buying fewer physical DC comics, even though
sure, no, absolutely,
you and I both love our physical books.
I do. I mean, I will say this, like, comics are, I'm now at a point with comics where I would rather read a run digitally, and then if it's like, wow, I would like to have this, I'll see what, you know, physical copies are available. But like I have a good collection of comics, you know, like trade paperbacks and some hardcovers, some DC Absolute versions and stuff. But you know, for the most part, comics, you know, are so made to be digestible that it's like, yeah, honestly, the ones that I'd want to have physical copies of are few and far between these days. Like, it's unfortunate. I don't think this Wonder Twins run will ever, you know, be given the due I believe it should be given. I think this is a great comic.
Yeah.
Like one that, you know, I'm glad it obviously was aimed at a younger audience, but that does not mean that, you know, only they should be reading it. I think this is a phenomenal use of the DC universe. It's super funny that there's so many characters. You'll be surprised at the characters that show up. Like, even just, there's so many cameos. Like when there's there's a very Venture Brothers take on the DC universe, which I like because I love Venture Brothers. There's like a villains mixer night.
Yeah.
And there's, you know, so there's this big panel of a whole bunch of villains, and there's a shot of the Scarecrow, and he's spraying some fear gas in somebody's face. He's like, it's kiwi scented. I love that.
This was so fun, and I'm glad I finally read it, because when you had mentioned it before, I think I went to go start to read it, and I read like the first issue and then just never went back to it, probably because I was in the midst of doing Stephen King stuff since this started coming out in 2019. And by the time I got DC Universe Infinite, I want to say that launched sometime in 2020 maybe, or like towards the end of 2019, something like that. And
2019 maybe. That sounds about right.
Yeah, so, you know, everything is about 6 months behind on there. So this was still coming out at the time, and I was like, I'll just wait until everything's on there. And then I just never went back to it. But I was like, I need some quick episodes to do for Geekdom, because I've been so bad at scheduling this podcast. And I only have 10 episodes to do after this. So just like, okay, I need to get on this scheduling. So Wonder Twins is a quick read too, even though it's 12 issues.
Oh, yeah.
You could probably knock it out in about an hour and a half, depending on how fast you read. And I was able to pretty quickly go through the remaining issues this morning before we recorded here. And it's just such a fun time. And this is an easy one to revisit. Like, I'll revisit certain comics, you know, Matt Fraction's Hawkeye, for instance. I've read that 2 or 3 times now. And I'm not someone who loves to reread things, but I find comics easier to reread just because you can obviously get through them faster than you can The Stand or something.
Oh yeah, I mean, the time investment can be less, but also, I love revisiting a lot of comics because there will be times, just like with any other type of art, where I key in on something particular. Like
Yeah.
I really liked. This is only the second time I've read through the entirety of the Wonder Twins run, but I was really paying attention to the lettering around this time, where it's like, oh, looking at the emphasis of words. That are, it's something that I think is made to be subliminal for the most part, but it's like, oh yeah, like some of them, and I'm sure this is probably indicated in the scripts by Russell as well, but there will be just a slight bold type, to certain words.
Yeah.
So for example, like in that quote that I had, if you look at that panel, the bolded words on that are yourself, Polly, decisions, and then that's all any of us can do. So like the focus, like you're picking up, it's like, okay, the key things about this are Jaina's perspective, how she feels about Polly, and the decisions that Polly made. And it's like, oh, this is stuff that you will, maybe not pick up on a first read of a comic, that it's like, oh, looking at the emphasis of the lettering and what they're trying to get across, or the artwork. Like, we didn't talk much about Stephen Byrne's artwork in here, and I think that's not a fair shake, because this is I like the look of this book a lot.
Yeah.
It's very just, but I think it's, especially knowing that it was made for an imprint aimed at younger readers, it's like, yeah, it's made to be very soft and approachable. Like it's a very cartoon style. Which I liked. Like, it fits the tone of the book and the characters perfectly.
Yeah, it really does. And I'm not sure who did the art with him, with Mark Russell on the Flintstones. I don't know if it was also Stephen Byrne.
No, it was not. I don't believe it was Stephen Byrne. It may have been, but I don't believe so. And I don't have that pulled up. And I think the Flintstones had more alternate artists.
Yeah, okay. But it really feels like Mark Russell's writing lends itself well to the style of art too, which I think
for
that's
sure.
crucial, because sometimes I'll read a comic and the art doesn't quite match the tone of the writing.
Mm-hmm.
And, you have various different art styles, especially if someone's doing, watercolors or something, which could be a colorist choice, not an artist choice, but sometimes that will tend to be the artist is also the colorist. So, you have some art that is much cleaner. You have some art that's a little more gritty and not as clean lines and a little more muddied. And that works for a certain kind of story. So I think, Mark Russell and Stephen Byrne were a great pairing for this title. And I think, like I said, the art changed for one or two issues, and
maybe I'm interested in you saying that, because I don't have a clear memory of that. I thought it was Byrne all the way through, but I may be wrong, because and it may, for some of these it may be like, well, it wasn't a full issue. It might have been, a page or something for that kind of stuff. That's a little bit.
It might have been issue 6, which could just be because or issue 7, which just could be because they did the first 6 issues and then they decided to do 6 more at a later time. So it could have been like they needed someone to do one because Stephen Byrne was doing something else.
Gotcha. It makes total sense. Yeah, they didn't have it planned in the schedule.
Yeah, I just remember when I was reading through, I definitely saw someone else's name on one of the issues, and I feel so bad for not remembering it.
Yeah, no. Now that you say that, I do remember. I have a. You've implanted that. You've incepted me, into believing it's like, oh yeah, I think there was another name by Stephen Byrne on at least one of the issues.
Yeah,
but still, I mean, the book is, I think when it comes to comic book art, it's tough, because there are certain books where clearly the art style is a big selling point, that it's like, oh, this is, and usually those are for more prestige titles. I mean, let's just be honest.
I have it. It's issue 8 actually, and it is Mike Norden who does the art, and it wasn't such a drastic change that you even noticed.
I didn't notice it, so I mean, good job on him. Yeah, no, I like the art style. It's soft, it's approachable, it's nothing groundbreaking, but it's exactly what it needs to be for the kind of audience it's going for and the story it's telling. I don't need everything to be illustrated by Bill Sienkiewicz or, like that kind of stuff. It's like, oh no, like it's fine. Like it's fine to have this stuff. But then on the other end, it's like, well, sometimes there can be this homogenous nature to a lot of these, particularly superhero comics, where the art, is just, not. It just feels secondary. And I think in this case with Wonder Twins, this is actually a really good case of the writing style and tone and characters merging with the art style in harmony. Like there's a real harmonious unity between them without trying to be, super. It's like, oh, we need to make this the, most incredible splash panel or whatever.
Which that's fun too. And
sure. I love me some splash panels.
Yeah, me too. Just a quick follow up on the Flintstones. The artist on that one is Steve Pugh.
Okay. Yeah.
We got two versions of Steve's here, which I think is why my brain was like, these are very similar names. Something's going on, but I don't know what it is.
I will say, like, I liked the Flintstones quite a bit, but I would have liked it more potentially if Stephen Byrne had done it, because I just think, like you said, his art is very in concert with Russell's writing.
Yeah.
Like they just really click together to the point where it's like there's just so many great little background gags and stuff that help with the world building of this. One of the big story points is this AI from the 80s is resurrected and is going to take over the world and destroy everything. And that issue is about the dangers of nostalgia and nostalgia being much more far reaching than just, oh, I liked these toys when I was a kid. It's like, and there's a poster for Lex News, and the tagline of it is "The Way Things Used to Be." And it's over, I believe, Jana talking about like the past is something that we need to acknowledge and understand, but we cannot like be stuck in it and beholden to it and, rose color it essentially, because then you get a lot of people thinking backwards thoughts because it's tied in with their nostalgia and their belief of a ideal or a mindset that didn't really exist, but to them it did, because that's their nostalgia in play. This is like the most basic, and we mentioned it, but it bears repeating. It's just a fun book. It's a really fun book. And fun being, it's not brainless. Like it's a smart, fun book. And I think it's rarer and rarer to see this balance of like, there's some real smart stuff going on here in terms of social commentary and picking apart certain things within the world and as an allegory or, metaphor for our own world. But at the end of the day, it's fun. It's fun being with these characters. It's funny. It's just a really, really great time. And I hope as the years go on and there's more, retrospectives into certain eras of DC, I really hope this gets the shine. Like if they ever came out with, some prestige release of this, because I think the only way you can get it is in 2 trade paperbacks as far as physical goes.
Yeah. And I think a lot of that had to do with the fact that they only planned 6 issues at first, and then they were like, oh, people are liking this, let's do 6 more.
Yeah, well, and again, it was also because, it's aimed at a younger audience, whereas, like I'm sure all the DC Black Label stuff is always up for like some hardcover edition or some prestige collection if it does, well critically in sales. But stuff like this, it's like, no, this was made to be kind of disposable because it's aimed at a younger audience. And, I can't speak of the other runs under this Wonder Comics imprint, but I really hope this one does not get lost in the shuffle.
Yeah.
Like it's really stand out. Like I said, I liked it more than is the Flintstones, and I really like the Flintstones. I would be fine. Like where the comic ends is a great ending, mm-hmm. but it does have a feel of like, hey, we could be back for more, because I think it says like it says see you in the next series, which is a very vague like, maybe it won't be a Wonder Twins series, but see you later.
It could be a team book, easily.
Yeah, something. I mean, there's a very fun Beast Boy appearance earlier
mm-hmm.
on. And I was like, oh man, like do Wonder Twins with the Teen Titans or some other, teen group. And from their perspective, from the Wonder Twins perspective.
And DC is obviously fine doing stuff like that because I know they did crossovers a while back, and I think those did pretty well, if I'm not mistaken. I mean, I don't have exact numbers on those, but I'm pretty sure like Tom King wrote the like whatever it was, Batman and Porky Pig or something.
I think it was Batman and Elmer Fudd.
Okay.
I think so. It might have been Batman and Porky Pig, but yeah, I mean, Tom King wrote that. Yeah, I mean, I just want, I don't know what else Mark Russell has done other than I think he wrote that Snagglepuss that again was very critically beloved. And, I would love to give him more room to play in the DC universe.
Yeah.
At the end of, spoiler alert for anybody who does want to read Wonder Twins, the very ending, the statement of the book is a really great one. The Justice League says to the Wonder Twins, like, look, you're right. Like, we are maintaining a status quo there, but what we're doing is solving problems. Like, somebody does need to stop meteors from crashing, into the planet. Like, someone needs to do that. But there are other problems in the world that the Justice League is not built to solve. And so for that, they create this new outlet called Asterisk that they want the Wonder Twins to run. That are like, yeah, and these are for problems that, like social problems that the Justice League that's not what we're doing. Like, yes, we have to stop the invasion of Brainiac. Somebody needs to be on call to do that.
Yeah.
But there are other problems in the world that we're not fixing. And so that's what you all need to do. And it's, it's a great message about like, yeah, like the younger generation has ideas and has, things that they want to try to solve the problems of the world. Give them the opportunity. And I would love to, like, in all honesty, that would be great. Like, it's just like, Zan and Jaina running their own super team. Like, honestly, you should call it Super Friends because that's where they're from. And just put together their own team of young, because the other thing I adore that Mark Russell gets to do here is create characters. There's so many created characters in here, like Praying Mantis and pretty much the entire League of Annoyance, which is a very Venture Brothers idea. There's the Malingerer, whose power just seems to be that he's extremely fragile and will sue you if you hurt him. So I would love that too. I love, the Scrambler is a great villain, like his ideology and everything, but he's silly. Like he's a guy that wears a little egg on his shirt. So I would love to see Mark Russell get to make even more characters because the ones he did were great. We didn't even talk about Baron Nightblood, as he likes to be called, but is more colloquially known as Druncula.
There's so many random fun characters in this.
Yeah, and those are again they're made up. I'm almost certain there's no Druncula in the DC history. And Mark Russell was like, yeah, I want to talk about, I want to make a villain that is, by the end of that story has been misserved by the systems of justice. His story is Druncula's story is a tragic one. But it's still funny.
Yeah.
But it is sad. And it's like, oh yeah. So I would love for him to just make up more ridiculous characters, because he's really good at it. But yeah, this is a great book. I can't sing its praises hardly enough. And like I said, I hope DC and readers, as time goes on, see how much value is really in it.
Yeah, absolutely. And you were correct. It's Batman and Elmer Fudd. It's Lex Luthor and Porky Pig, which is great.
Yes. Okay. Yes.
So,
two bald boys.
I knew there was a version of that in there somewhere. But yeah, I second everything you said. Check this out. If you have not yet, I think DC is doing a lot of fun stuff like this, especially within the last 5 to 6 years, roughly, maybe even more so in the last 3 years. And, I am looking forward to reading things like the Human Target series that they're doing. And
yeah, I've heard good stuff about that.
There's just so much that I think gets lost in the continuity shuffle, the ongoing shuffle, if you will.
Yeah. Don't pay attention. Like, find the stuff. Like, that's why I I still need to read the Tom King's and what's the Mr. Miracle artist guy, Mitch something.
Mitch Jared's?
Yes, like they're Strange Adventures. I still need to read that.
Yeah, I have Mr. Miracle sitting on my shelf. So I was like, all right, I
Mr.
got to do
Miracle's great.
Strange Adventures. And then Tom King is doing that Human Target one with Greg Smallwood, whose art I really love too. And it's so nice to be able to just read these all digitally. My issue lately has been having time to justify paying for all of these comic services.
Sure, yeah. I mean, they still get they still get you for it.
I just do yearly, and I'm like, okay, if I read X amount of comics within this year, then I can live with that price.
Yeah, you got to justify it.
Yeah.
So no, yeah. I mean, I'm all in on the limited series stuff. You know, like talking about Tom King. It's like I still need to finish his Rorschach because I was like, yeah, I'm enjoying this, but I'm just gonna wait till it's all done.
Yeah, that's the nice thing about the app too, though, is like there's usually always at least one finished series that you want to read on there. So then by the
Right.
time you read that, you have something else. And I've been checking out random things like this is technically an ongoing, so it has a lot of issues, but like the Scooby-Doo comics. And the Scooby-Doo team up where they team up with Batman and Robin and all of these other characters. They just have so many fun things that I think people don't think to look for within the DC Universe app because they're just like, I'm going to read Batman. I'm going to read Superman, you know?
Right, yeah, Batman suit. Yeah, the big ones are always going to be the ones that keep the ship afloat. But, you know, that's
And look, I've heard really, really good things about Tom Taylor's Nightwing run, which is why I started reading it from the beginning, because I knew at the beginning there was some good stuff that I had enjoyed. So I revisited that, and I'm kind of at a low point now, but I'm going to power through. And by the time I get caught up, that should be like around 100 issues that I read on DC Universe Infinite. So just for that one series.
kudos.
So that's not even counting like this or anything else that I've been reading, because I've also been wanting to read, like, I think I missed one of the Hill House series.
Okay.
So I think I still need to read Plunge. And then I know they're doing Refrigerator Full of Heads now. So I'm kind of waiting for that to all be up there if it isn't already. And James Tynion IV's Nice House on the Lake. That looks really, really good. So I'm going to check that out once there's a few more issues of it. But
Nice.
Drew, thank you so much for recommending this. It has been great chatting.
Yeah, well, you know, I'm always, you know, I don't, like I said, I don't read nearly as many comics as I used to, but every once in a while, there's one that's like,
Yeah.
hey, check this out. And definitely, if you know, there's some older comics, if you haven't checked out, I could see what's on my shelf essentially, and see what you might have access to, because I'm always here for some pro comics talk. So thanks for having me on, Deanna.
Of course.